Last week at a football scrimmage, I watched something that probably happens in thousands of parking lots every Saturday. A dad gives their son one simple, hey, next time correction. Hey, next time, remember that on that one play, you block right instead of left. That was it. Nothing harsh, nothing personal, just a coaching cue. And almost immediately, the athlete pushed back. I know. The dad tried again. The player came back with an excuse, then an explanation. Then they crossed their arms and huffed. I watched the dad take a fortifying breath and just get in his truck. And standing nearby, watching this interaction, I wasn't really watching the athlete. I found myself watching the dad because I knew exactly what he was probably thinking, right? Why does he always argue? Is he going to become one of those kids nobody wants to coach? Like, why can't my kid just take a reminder? And honestly, I've had those exact same thoughts about my own son. But the longer I've coached adults and the more I watch kids, the more convinced I become that we're often asking the wrong questions because the argument usually isn't the real problem. Hi, I'm Sam. Welcome back to another episode of Locker Talk, where we talk about youth sports and how the behaviors we observe in our athletes can become what they need to perform at their best today and the life skills that they need to lead tomorrow. When adults learn to read, reset, and respond instead of reacting, we can expand the potential of who our athletes can become. Here's what I think most of us assume, right? Our athlete argues with their coach or their parent, and so we come to the conclusion that they're being uncoachable. They've got an attitude problem. They're disrespectful. And we get mad, frustrated, worried, you name it. But what I've noticed after years of coaching leaders in corporate environments and watching athletes compete is that two people can show the exact same behavior for completely different reasons. One becomes defensive because they think they're about to fail. Another becomes defensive because they feel misunderstood and another because they're embarrassed. Same behavior, different pattern underneath. And youth sports works the exact same way. That's why behavior alone never tells us the whole story. It simply tells us where to become curious. In fact, one of the sentences that athletes say all the time completely changed how I think about coachability in general. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But first, there's something important I think that we miss. The coach thinks they're giving instruction. The dad, the mom, the grandma, the adult thinks that they're helping. But the athlete may be hearing evaluation. The coach says, move your feet. The athlete hears, I shouldn't have messed that up. The coach says, keep your head up. The athlete hears, I'm disappointing my coach. Same words, completely different meaning. And once that happens, they're no longer processing the instruction. They're protecting themselves. They're processing the feeling of kind of a threat that they have to some piece of who they are. And so sometimes they argue, sometimes they explain, sometimes they blame, sometimes they shut down. Not because they don't care, right? Like sometimes we're like, oh, they just don't look like they care about this. But it's often because they care deeply. And we've touched on that. We've hurt that in some way. And so that's why they're giving you that pushback. And it's why I always come back to one of the core beliefs behind everything I teach is that the pressure of a situation isn't creating the behavior. The pressure is revealing a pattern of behavior. It reveals how an athlete currently responds to feedback, right? What do they feel when that happens? And once we understand that pattern for them, then we can begin real development and real help in that space. One of the mistakes I think adults make is assuming that all defensiveness comes from a really similar place. It doesn't, and I've noticed at least five different patterns, but generally I see more like seven or eight. But some athletes hear correction as I'm not good enough. Others hear I should already know how to do this. Some lose trust in themselves after a single mistake. Others feel controlled. Others feel misunderstood. And some simply react before they've had time to think about it at all, right? It's that emotional kind of reactivity. And why this really matters, because if you think every pushback, every argument is just being disrespectful, you're going to respond in the same way every single time. But if you realize that different patterns need different development and need different things in that moment, you'll stop trying to fix the behavior and start trying to understand it so you can work together on the thing and the reaction and the pattern underneath. It is a completely different conversation. And there's one response from parents that almost always makes defensiveness work worse. And even though it's incredibly well intentioned, sometimes we kind of miss that a bit, right? So when our athlete becomes defensive, our nervous system often joins the game. We become embarrassed. We become frustrated. We want to correct the correction. And now we're coaching the coach's coaching. And suddenly everybody in the situation is reacting. Nobody's learning. And one of the biggest shifts I've learned that I've made both as a parent and a coach is to stop asking, how do I stop this behavior? And start asking, what is this behavior really protecting? That one question really changes everything and how you approach it because curiosity slows us down, judgment speeds us up. And these moments need us to slow down. The kids need our calm. And so this is why I pay attention because I already know where this pattern goes. I've watched adults lose opportunities, not because they weren't talented, but because they couldn't receive feedback. I've watched leaders lose trust, professionals become isolated, teams stop speaking honestly, not because anybody in the situation was bad or ill-intended. It's because every defensiveness made learning really difficult and made people around you not want to approach you. And that's why coachability isn't just a sports skill, it is a leadership behavior. It is something that allows for us to continue to grow throughout our lives. Sports simply reveal it a lot earlier than your first job or the first time a boss tries to give you feedback. And the beautiful part is that coachability isn't something that your athlete either has or doesn't. It's not a quality. It's a collection of behaviors. It's listening, pausing, getting curious, trying the feedback before rejecting it, separating correction from identity. Those are behaviors that can be practiced. And that's just part of the development process and part of growing up in general. So the next time your athlete argues with a coach, don't ignore it, but don't rush to label it either. Become curious. Ask yourself, what might this moment be revealing? Because behavior is information, not identity. Pressure didn't create the response, it simply helped you see it. And once you see it, you can begin helping your athlete development. So thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today. If this episode made you think differently about coachability and defensive responses to feedback, I'd love for you to share it with another parent or coach who could use the reminder. And until next time, just keep paying attention because sports reveal so much more than the scoreboard. They reveal who our athletes are becoming, and we can help them grow into the best version of who that may be. So put down the popcorn and get in the game.